So we pick up in part 2 on the story of Joseph, and what I'd like to kind of talk about today, something that really fascinates me are the times where when Joseph's brother, when they're coming down there, they meet him for the first time. They have no idea of his identity. They do not realize that he has been exalted, that it's their brother at all. And we find this in chapters 42 and 43 of Genesis and or Bereshit. And in doing so, there's particular things that really are fascinating to me, and that happens to be when Joseph finally gets to grilling them on whether or not they're spies or not, and then he commands his servant to put the grain or the corn in their bags to fill their bags up, and return the money into the sacks. And they leave there, and when they're en route going back, there's a particular scripture that I found kind of fascinating, and it's in chapter 42, verse 27. Now let's back up to verse 25. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, this is, I'm using a New King James Version. That word encampment actually in Hebrew is malon, or bemalon, as it says in Hebrew. It literally means, in modern times we call that a hotel. I think King James actually calls it an inn, which would be more correct to say as well than just an encampment. But anyway, he said he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. And just keep that in mind for just a moment, because we're going to come back to that in just a second. I want to go ahead and jump over, though, to chapter 43. Now, after this takes place, they go back home. They're talking to their father. They tell them how that the man, which, speaking of Joseph, had dealt rough with them, give them a hard way to go, and that he would not see them again unless he brought his youngest brother Benjamin. And of course, Jacob is all inflamed over this idea. Why did you even tell him, that you had a brother? I mean, it's like, are you crazy? So, but they, Judah, I believe it was Judah that actually makes that comment to his father that, the man straightly asked of our estate. In other words, it was like he knew what was going on. But Jacob would not let Benjamin go at that time. And so they ran out of food. And when they finally ran out of food, and it's at the point of death for the entire tribes of Jacob or of Israel, then he finally consents to let Benjamin go. And in this particular case, he says, if I am bereaved of both my sons, being that of Rachel, then I am just bereaved. And he said, I would die. He said, my gray hairs would come down with sorrow to the grave. Speaking of that, for the mourning, because of already thinking that he's lost Joseph. And that, of course, is a beautiful type right there. Benjamin is that type of the remnant Jews that have returned back to the homeland in Israel today. That is what we see when we see Benjamin coming home. He was not taking part of the death of his brother, or the supposed death. He was not a part of the cover-up. He had nothing to do with that. He is totally an innocent one, and has suffered because of that. Because of the very fact that his brother was missing, and seen so much suffering of his father and his family because due to all this. But anyhow, finally Jacob actually says to them, if it must be so, and this is in chapter 43, verse 11, then do this: take some of the best fruits. And he's talking about allowing Benjamin to go back, as we're talking here. Of the land in your vessels, and carry down a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Take double money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. And little things like this, most people might just look over. It's like, why double money? But I believe that there is a significance in these things that we find here. So they go back down. They take this all to him, and let me just go ahead and touch on those two there, because then we're going to go into the third situation that takes place. When it speaks about, no, that, you know, I'm going to, I want to kind of touch it all and then kind of reveal the mysteries that I believe that God has shown me on this. Let's go on. Let's shoot up to verse 19 in chapter 43. At this point here, they've gotten back. They've come down into the land. They're talking to Joseph's servant. They're nervous as it is. They realize that God has already found out their sins, and so they're nervous about what's going on. How did the money get back in their sacks? They're up there to the steward. They're talking to him, and they're like, you know, trying to make things easier with him. So they say here, when they drew near to the steward of the Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment, or the inn, the hotel, that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand, and we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simon out to them. Now, so the money is put back. You know, he lets them know that they brought it back. They brought double the money. And then what happens, though, is they're going to dine with their brother Joseph. Joseph says, you know, prepare that he would meet them at noon. In fact, let's just look at this real quick. So the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet and gave their donkeys feed. Then they made the presents ready for Joseph, coming at noon. And as we mentioned earlier on another video there, I really believe that noon time happens to show the hour based on the 7 years that's allotted to Israel, that when Jesus would actually make himself known to his brethren. I believe it's right in the middle of the week is what that represents there. And in fact, I will go back and look at this here again, or just double back here. When we see the part where the discovery is made at the end, where they discover their money at the end, I believe everything that we have here is symbolic. It would be, in other words, when Joseph was rejected is one thing, but the story is a beautiful type of how Jesus himself was rejected of his own brethren. And the first time that Jesus was ever rejected by his own brethren is when he was in the womb of his mother, Mary. And Joseph, his adopted father, has his wife, she's great with child, and he comes by the inn to try to get a place in order to give his wife and his newborn adopted son a decent place to be born at, and was rejected at the end. There was no room found for him, and he was pushed away. And I believe that that's exactly why we see in symbolism here that in the story of Joseph, that the money was found there first, showing that they rejected Christ at the very beginning, at the end, when he was in the womb of his mother. And then when we go forward in the time there, and we find that they go back down, they bring double money and the money that was returned to their sack. So it's like you have 3 times the money. And no doubt the money is put back in the sack to show that they sold Joseph in the first place. And that is a reminder to them, to let them know. That's what jogs their memory when they see the money in the sack, that certainly God has found out their sins. And it was they sold their brother. But when they come back with double the money, and then we find later in the story that money is returned to them as well, showing that not only did they reject Joseph, but they rejected their second brother, the second Joseph. Jesus was rejected as well and was sold out for 30 pieces of silver, somewhat like it was with Joseph. And this is why we see that the double money is paid back. Now, I believe that double money, though, has a lot to do with Isaiah 61, which we may not have time to get into that right now. But as we move forward in the story, the one last thing I'd like to point out here is the fact that after this takes place and they come up there, they dine with Joseph. He doesn't reveal himself to them as of yet, but what he does is he puts the corn in their sack, sending them on their way, but this time he puts the cup in Benjamin's sack. No one has any idea where the cup is at. And he sends them out early the next morning, and the steward, after Joseph gets up, he says, go follow them and bring them back. When he does, he brings them back, and he accuses them of being thieves now. He said, now you have stolen my master's cup. And how could this be? And of course, they start from the eldest all the way to the youngest. And of course, Israel's already saying, we'll be bondsmen to you. You know, whoever the cup is found with, let that be your bondsman. And the cup is found with Benjamin, a totally innocent child that's done no wrong whatsoever, but yet the accusation is placed on him. And Benjamin, being a type of the 144,000 of Revelation, it is the 144,000. It's symbolic in the sign of the very hour that Israel will receive and come to the understanding that they rejected their brother Jesus at the communion table. And that's why the cup was placed in the bag. It is a signpost. And that hour is soon at hand, and the 144,000 will see that they rejected Jesus at the communion table. The innocent party that had nothing to do with his death. They did not put him on a cross. They did not sanction him to the Romans to be crucified. But it will be them that realize that this is where we went wrong. This is where we made our mistake.